Meet 39-year-old Anthony Millspaugh. 1 year ago, Anthony was recorded as he murdered an 18-year-old girl, hiding her in a suitcase and leaving her in these woods to disappear.
You're kind of fighting for your life because this young girl died. The whole outcome to this thing makes you look horrible, okay?
Meet Anthony Millspaugh, 39 years old. 1 year ago. Anthony wheeled an 18-year-old girl's body to Upper Park in a green suitcase, set it on fire, and walked away. Her name was Chloee Moore. She'd overdosed in his apartment, and instead of calling 911, he chose silence. For 11 months. Anthony believed he'd gotten away with it, but surveillance cameras don't forget. Frame by frame, investigators assembled a timeline that would prove him wrong. This is the story of how a man's attempt to erase evidence became the very thing that led detectives straight to him. But before the suitcase and the fire, there was a young woman with a future. Chloee Moore counted her hours the way other 18-year-olds counted down to weekends, like they were adding up to something bigger. Late August 2023. Evening shift at the Tacoma Safeway. Chloe stood at register 4, scanning groceries with the kind of mechanical efficiency that comes from repetition, not passion. Beep. Milk. Beep. Bread. Beep. Cereal with the barcode half peeled. She angled it under the red scanner light until the register chirped. The fluorescent overhead made everything look flattened, washed pale. Customers passed through her line in a steady rotation. Paper or plastic, card or cash. Have a good night. But Chloe's mind wasn't on them. She was doing math. Dental hygienist training cost more than she'd saved, which meant more shifts, more weeks, more scanned boxes of pasta and 6-packs of soda. She'd graduated high school that spring. Most of her friends were already enrolled somewhere, posting dorm photos and freshman orientation selfies. Chloe was posting grocery hauls and paychecks she couldn't spend yet. But she had a plan. Every hour at this register moved her closer to enrollment. Every paycheck went into the account she wasn't touching. She'd told her mother about the apartment she wanted. Nothing big, just her own place. Somewhere she could start building the life she'd outlined in notebooks during senior year. "Mom, I'm so excited," she'd said. "Finally gonna have my own place." The register drawer slid open with a metallic scrape. Chloe counted out change, handed it across the counter, and started the next transaction without looking up. Another customer, another cart, another set of items to scan and bag. Cool plastic under her fingertips as she shook open the grocery bag. The store's announcement system crackled overhead. Clean-up needed in aisle 6, and she kept working. That's what plans feel like when you're 18 and just starting. They feel solid, reachable. You do the math. You show up for the shifts. You keep the account balance climbing. You talk to your mother about apartments. You calculate how many more paychecks until you can stop scanning other people's groceries and start building something that's yours. You don't know yet that plans only matter when you're alive to finish them. Chloe scanned the last item in the cart, read the total from the register screen, and processed the payment. The customer took their bags and left. She reset the conveyor belt and waited for the next one. The shift wasn't over. The week wasn't over. The plan was still intact. She had 8 more days. In 8 days, the plan would stop mattering to anyone but her mother. The hours Chloe was counting, every shift, every paycheck, every scanned barcode that brought her closer to tuition would become hours someone else spent searching for her. The apartment she wanted would stay empty. The training program would start without her name on the roster. But on this ordinary evening under fluorescent lights in a Tacoma Safeway, Chloee Moore was still counting, still planning, still adding up hours like they were infinite. She had no reason to think otherwise. September 1st, 8 days after the Safeway shift. Chloee Moore walked north on Martin Luther King Way in Tacoma toward a man waiting under a streetlight. Evening had dropped the temperature, but not the light. Dusk held everything in a grey-blue wash that made streetlights look brighter than they were. The security camera mounted above 824 Martin Luther King Way captured her approach in silent black and white. Chloee carried a heavy bag, the kind that pulls one shoulder lower than the other. She walked at an easy pace. Nothing about her stride suggested she was afraid. Anthony Millspaugh stood near the building's front entrance. 39 years old. He'd been out of prison for a year after serving 20 for a murder he'd committed when he was 17. Now he lived in an apartment at the Franklin Rosa Apartments, just north of where Chloee was walking. She reached him. They spoke too far from the camera's microphone to hear, but close enough to see. He gestured toward her bag. "I can carry that for you," he said. She handed it over without hesitation. "Thanks." He took the bag, slung it over his shoulder with the ease of someone used to carrying weight, and they started walking north together, side by side. Chloe's hands were empty now. Anthony walked slightly ahead, leading. They passed beneath the camera's lens, moving toward the alley behind the building. "Just around back?" he asked. She nodded. The footage doesn't show impairment. Chloee wasn't stumbling, she wasn't swaying. Her gait was steady, her posture upright. If she'd taken anything by this point. It hadn't taken hold yet. She looked like a young woman accepting a small courtesy from someone she knew well enough to trust, with a heavy bag. That's what ordinary looks like. Two people walking together at dusk. A man carrying something for a woman who looks tired. A neighbourly gesture. A few exchanged words. Nothing that would make a passerby stop and wonder if they should intervene. The camera overhead recorded it all, the last true thing it would ever show of her. They disappeared behind the building, out of frame. The alley back there had no camera coverage, no line of sight from the street. Whatever happened next happened in a space the surveillance system couldn't see. The footage continued running, capturing an empty stretch of sidewalk where two people had just been. 13 minutes passed. 13 minutes is not a long time. It's a coffee break, a song on repeat 3 times. The gap between deciding to leave and actually walking out the door. In 13 minutes, you can check your phone, tie your shoes, scan a dozen more groceries at a Safeway register. In 13 minutes, everything that mattered about Chloee Moore's plan, the tuition account, the apartment, the future she'd been counting toward, stopped being something she could finish. 13 minutes later, the same camera captured Anthony Millspaugh walking back into frame. He was still carrying something, not the bag. Her. Chloee hung limp in his arms, head tilted back, limbs slack. He moved quickly, no longer the courteous neighbour, no longer walking side by side. Nothing about the way she hung in his arms looked ordinary at all. The 13 minutes between walking normally and being carried happened in the alley behind the Franklin Rosa Apartments. No camera there. That was the point. Chloee and Anthony had gone around back where the security system's blind spot began. The darkness was thicker there, away from the streetlights that had captured their walk. She'd been texting about withdrawal all day, nausea, body aches, racing heart. And Anthony had what she needed. Blues, counterfeit painkillers pressed with fentanyl, sold as relief, but mixed with something far more dangerous. She smoked the first hit, then the second. "That's enough," Anthony said. "Come on, let's get out of here." But withdrawal doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about enough. Chloe's voice came out edged with the kind of desperation that makes bad decisions feel like survival. "Just let me hit it one more time," she said. "I just need to hit it one more time." He handed it over. She lit it, inhaled. The chemical burn filled her lungs, and the relief she'd been chasing all day finally arrived. But it didn't come alone. Her footing went first. A wobble, a sway. She reached for the wall and missed. "Come on," Anthony said. "We can go sit down or something." Her nose started to bleed. The window for saving someone from an overdose is shorter than most people think. Minutes, sometimes seconds. Naloxone can reverse it if administered fast enough. If someone calls for help, if paramedics arrive before the respiratory system shuts down completely. But all of that requires one thing. Someone has to choose to call. Chloe's breathing changed. Shallow, uneven. Her legs weren't holding her weight anymore. She sagged against the building, then slid toward the pavement. Blood from her nose traced a dark line down her chin. Anthony watched her collapse. Here's what he didn't do. Pull out his phone, dial 911, flag down a passerby, yell for help, run to the street where cameras and witnesses could see, perform CPR. Do any of the things that might have pulled her back from the edge she was sliding over. Here's what he did. He picked her up. Not to carry her toward help, not to rush her to an emergency room 3 blocks away. He lifted her limp body into his arms and turned back toward his apartment at the Franklin Rosa, the building they'd just walked past together when she was still upright, still talking, still counting hours toward a future that was evaporating with every shallow breath she took. She didn't ask for anything after that. No more hits, no water, no help. The desperation that had driven her to that alley, to those pills, to one more hit, despite the warning gone. The nausea and body aches she'd texted about that morning solved, but not the way she'd hoped. She asked for one more hit. It would be the last thing she ever asked for. 13 minutes after the security camera captured them walking north together. Him carrying her bag, her walking steady beside him. The same camera caught him returning, still carrying something, not the bag, her. Head tilted back, arms hanging loose, nothing about her posture suggested consciousness. He carried her past the camera's lens and into his apartment. The door closed behind them. Inside the apartment, Chloe couldn't stand. She couldn't speak clearly. She couldn't hold her own weight. So Anthony picked her up. He lifted her from where she'd collapsed in the alley and carried her toward the building. Her body hung limp in his arms, head lolling back, blood still streaking from her nose across her face. He moved quickly, but not frantically. Not like someone rushing toward emergency help. He was moving toward his apartment. He set her down between the buildings, propped against a wall where the shadows were thickest. His shirt was soaked through with sweat from carrying her weight. He left her there and went upstairs alone, changed his clothes, came back down. "Come on," he said, lifting her again. "I got you." He carried her up the stairs to his apartment. Each step required effort. Her dead weight shifted in his arms, her limbs slack, her breathing shallow and uneven. The stairwell was narrow. The door at the top opened into a small unit at the Franklin Rosa Apartments, the kind of place where neighbours don't ask questions and surveillance doesn't reach. He would later claim he asked if she wanted help. "Want me to call the emergency?" he said he asked her. According to him, she mumbled a response, barely conscious. "No, he'll find me." That's his account. A dying woman refusing rescue because someone would find her. It's the kind of detail that sounds like an excuse shaped to fit a narrative after the fact. But even if she said it, even if Chloe, overdosing and incoherent, managed to form those words, it doesn't answer the question that matters. He had a phone. He had 2 hands. He had a door he could have opened to yell for help. He had neighbours. He had a street 3 floors below where cars passed and people walked. Calling for help would have cost him nothing. Yet. No consequences, no charges, just a scared neighbour who found someone overdosing and did the right thing. Paramedics arrive. Naloxone administered. Questions asked later, but she'd be alive to answer them. Why didn't he? The door to his apartment closed. The latch clicked. Chloe lay inside, her body shutting down system by system, while Anthony decided what to do next. Hours passed. Then a full day. Then another. September 2nd became September 3rd. Chloe's mother was sending texts to a phone that would never answer. Friends were wondering why she'd gone silent. The Safeway shift she was supposed to work went uncovered. The tuition account she'd been building sat untouched. The apartment she'd told her mother about stayed a plan on paper. Anthony had 2 days, 48 hours to change his mind, to pick up the phone and dial 3 numbers, to open the door and shout for someone, anyone. To do the thing that panic and decency and basic human instinct should have triggered the moment he realized she was overdosing. He never did. Instead, he kept her inside the apartment, kept the door closed, kept the choice he'd made in the alley, carry. Don't call and let time pass until calling wouldn't matter anymore. 2 days. Long enough to know she wasn't getting better. Long enough to understand that silence was a decision. While Chloe lay in Anthony's apartment, unreachable and unresponsive, her mother sat somewhere else with a phone in her hands, watching messages go unanswered. The morning after Chloee Moore stopped answering her phone, her mother sent a text that began with the word, "Please." September 2nd, early morning. Chloe's mother had been calling and texting through the night. No response, no read receipts. Just silence where her daughter's voice should have been. She typed another message. "Chloe, if you're getting my calls and messages, baby girl, please just let me know you're all right. I can hardly breathe." Sent, delivered, not read. She kept typing. "I have to report you missing around 7 a.m. I know you don't want all that extra BS. Just call me real quick. Pumpkin. Pumpkin. Baby girl. My person." The names mothers use when love and fear are tangled too tight to separate. She wasn't angry. She was bargaining with a screen that wouldn't bargain back. The phone glowed in her hands. Messages piled up on her side, sent, delivered, waiting for acknowledgement that would never come. Each text carried the same desperate hope that Chloe was just sleeping, or busy, or upset about something fixable. 7 a.m. approached. The deadline she'd set not as punishment, but as the line between worry and action. If Chloe didn't respond by 7, she'd report her missing. She sent one more message. I love you, Chloe. You're my person. There is no greater cruelty than the hope that arrives too late. Texting someone who's already gone feels the same as texting someone who's ignoring you. The phone doesn't know the difference. It sends the message either way, marks it delivered, waits for a read receipt that measures whether the screen lit up, not whether the person holding it is still alive to see it. Chloe's mother kept texting, because mothers don't stop trying just because the silence stretches. She kept calling because the alternative, accepting that something was deeply wrong, wasn't something she could face at 7 in the morning when her daughter should have been texting back about shift schedules or apartment plans. Chloe never saw the messages. By the time they arrived, by the time her mother typed baby girl and pumpkin and I can hardly breathe, Chloe had already been in Anthony's apartment for almost a full day. The phone her mother kept texting sat somewhere with Chloe's belongings, screen dark, battery draining, notifications piling up unread. 7 a.m. came and went. Chloe's mother filed the missing person report. Police took down details. Investigators started building a timeline. But none of them knew yet that Chloe wasn't missing in the way they thought. She wasn't lost. She wasn't hiding. She was 3 floors above street level at the Franklin Rosa, and the man who'd carried her there was running out of time to make the choice he kept not making. While Chloe's mother filed the missing person report, Chloe lay in Anthony's apartment. The water was still running when he came back to check on her. He'd left her in the bathroom hours earlier. Put her in the shower, turned on the water, walked away. Maybe he thought the cold spray would wake her. Maybe he couldn't think of anything else to do. Either way, the shower had been running for hours. The sound reached him before he opened the door, water hitting tile in a steady stream. Steam filled the small room, fogging the mirror. Chloe was squatted down under the spray, head tilted forward, arms limp. Water ran over her face, her shoulders, pooled around her knees. Blood from the nosebleed was long gone, washed away. "Chloe," Anthony said. "Chloe." No response. No movement. Just water and silence. He reached toward her neck, trying to find a pulse. His own heart pounded so hard in his fingertips that he couldn't tell if what he felt was her heartbeat or his. He would later say he wasn't sure, that he tried but couldn't tell. "I tried to check her pulse, but I wasn't sure," he'd tell investigators. "I was scared to touch her. Scared to touch her. Not scared enough to call for help. Not scared enough to yell for a neighbor. Not scared enough to dial 3 numbers and let someone trained make the determination he claimed he couldn't. This was the moment help could have still mattered, and he chose to walk away from it. Fear becomes the reason people do nothing when they mean to use it as the reason they couldn't do anything. But fear didn't stop Anthony from carrying Chloe up the stairs. It didn't stop him from putting her in the shower. Fear was selective about what it prevented. He stood in the doorway, water misting toward him, steam thick. Chloe hadn't moved. The water kept running. His phone was in his pocket, fully charged. 3 digits from paramedics who might have tried naloxone. CPR. Anything. He turned around and walked out. Left her squatted in the shower. Left the water running. Left the door unlocked. He just walked away. When he came back hours later, nothing about Chloe had changed. She was still in the shower, still unresponsive. Still squatted under water that had gone from cold to colder. But something about his decision had shifted. The window for calling 911 and explaining this as a panicked mistake had closed. Too many hours had passed. Too many chances to do the right thing had slipped by. The question was no longer how to save her. It was what to do now that she couldn't be saved. He picked up his phone. But he didn't dial emergency services. He needed someone who wouldn't ask the questions paramedics would ask. Someone who would help him with what came next, instead of what should have come first. Anthony stood in his apartment with Chloe's body in the bathroom and his phone in his hand. He scrolled past the number for emergency services to find his nephew's name instead. TJ Anthony's nephew. Young enough to still answer when someone called asking for help. Old enough to drive over without asking too many questions first. Anthony pressed call. The phone rang twice. "What do you do if someone's overdosing?" Anthony asked. Not "I need an ambulance," not "someone collapsed," just a hypothetical question posed like he was curious, like there wasn't a woman in his shower 3 rooms away. "I don't know, man," TJ said. "I don't mess with that stuff. Give them Narcan or something. Outside of that, I don't know." Narcan, the overdose reversal drug that paramedics carry. That Anthony could have accessed hours ago if he'd made a different phone call. But Narcan requires someone trained to administer it. It requires calling the people Anthony had decided not to call. "Can you come over?" Anthony asked. That was the real question, not what to do, whether TJ would show up. TJ said yes. Anthony paced the apartment while he waited. Phone gripped tight, bathroom door still closed. The water had been turned off, but the silence was worse. He kept moving, kitchen to living room to hallway, never opening the bathroom door. Never looking that what he'd already decided couldn't be saved. 20 years earlier. Anthony Millspaugh was 17 when someone older pulled him into a crisis that wasn't his. It was 2002, a robbery. Anthony drove the car, the getaway driver, for a crime that killed a man named Cody Glotfelty. 17 years old, behind the wheel, doing what he was told because someone older said they needed help. He spent 20 years in prison for that choice. 20 years in prison taught him only one thing: how to pull someone else into the same trap he'd fallen into at their age. He didn't call 911, he called TJ. He didn't ask for professionals who might save a life. He asked for family who might help him hide what came after. The pattern was repeating, but this time Anthony wasn't the teenager being pulled in. He was the one making the call. Footsteps sounded outside. A knock. Anthony opened the door. TJ stood in the hallway, young and unaware, the way Anthony had been 2 decades earlier, when someone asked him to drive and didn't explain what the drive was for until it was too late to say no. "What's going on?" TJ asked. Anthony stepped aside. TJ came. He didn't know yet what he was walking into. Didn't know about the woman in the bathroom. Didn't know about the hours without a call for help. Didn't know that showing up meant complicity, whether he intended it or not. By the time he understood, the choice to leave would already be gone. He crossed the threshold. The door closed behind him, and whatever came next, TJ would be part of it. The same way Anthony had been part of someone else's crime when he was barely older than TJ was now. TJ crossed the threshold into Anthony's apartment, but the consequences of showing up wouldn't become clear for months. Not until detectives started asking questions no one wanted to answer. When Chloee Moore's body was found burned in a suitcase in Upper Park, the first question detectives asked was who she'd been afraid of. The investigation room at Tacoma Police Department held the accumulated weight of the case witness statements, surveillance footage stills pinned to a board, red string connecting locations and timelines. The lead detective stood in front of it, reviewing leads that had taken weeks to run down. His partner, Detective Deere, sat at the desk flipping through manila folders, phones ringing somewhere down the hall. She told people she was scared of someone, the lead detective said. We need to find out who. Boyfriend's the obvious first look, Deere replied. Always is. In cases like this, the boyfriend, the ex, the current partner, whoever held that role becomes the first door detectives knock on. Not because it's always the right door, because statistics and pattern recognition say it's the door most likely to open onto the answer. Intimate partner violence, domestic disputes escalating, relationships that turned dangerous. The data doesn't lie about where to start, so they started there, with the boyfriend Chloe had been seeing, the man some people referred to as Aaron. They pulled his phone records, checked his location data, interviewed people who'd seen them together, asked about fights, about jealousy, about anything that might explain why someone would kill an 18-year-old woman and burn her body in a suitcase. The boyfriend answered their questions, gave them his timeline for September 1st, showed them receipts, messages, witnesses who could confirm where he'd been. He had an alibi. He wasn't anywhere near Martin Luther King Way that night. His alibi checks out, the lead detective said, marking another name off the board. He wasn't there. Cases like this aren't solved by finding the right door on the first try. They're solved by closing every wrong one until only one remains. Detective Deere knew this. The lead detective knew this. Every investigator who'd worked a homicide longer than a year knew that the obvious suspect being cleared didn't mean the case was cold. It meant the real suspect was someone they hadn't identified yet, someone who didn't fit the expected profile, someone who might not even be on the list. The boyfriend was cleared. The investigation moved on to the next lead, then the next. Each door properly closed before moving forward. Each alibi verified. Each statement cross-checked against surveillance footage and phone records. And somewhere in Upper Park, the suitcase that had held Chloe's body sat as evidence. A piece of luggage that would eventually connect to an address, a car. A man who lived 3 floors above street level at 824 Martin Luther King Way. The boyfriend had an alibi. The real one didn't need to lie about being there, he just never mentioned it. While detectives cleared the obvious suspect and worked through the list of people Chloe might have feared, the actual last person to see her alive stayed silent. He didn't call police to report what happened. He didn't insert himself into the investigation with a fake concern. He just said nothing, and nothing, for a while, worked. The real suspect stayed silent while detectives cleared wrong doors. But the evidence he'd left behind wasn't silent. It was just waiting for someone to hear it. The footage was already in the file, timestamp stamped and logged, sitting 3 folders deep in evidence storage, where it had been since October. The lead detective sat in the evidence review room, computer monitor glowing in the dim light. He scrolled through early surveillance logs from the neighborhood around 824 Martin Luther King Way. Hundreds of hours of footage, thousands of frames, people walking dogs, driving past, carrying groceries, living ordinary lives while a woman went missing 3 floors above street level. Somewhere in that footage was the answer. The log entry appeared on screen. Date stamped September 2nd, early morning. Subject unidentified male, wheeling luggage to vehicle. A man, a suitcase, a car. Logged routinely because surveillance cameras capture everything the mundane and the critical in equal measure. At the time it was recorded, no one knew to flag it. No one knew yet that Chloee Moore was missing. No one connected a man wheeling luggage with a woman who would turn up burned in a suitcase in Upper Park. The detective clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, but clear enough. A man walked from the building's direction, wheeling a suitcase behind him. Green, with brown leather trim. Large enough to hold more than clothes. He loaded it into his vehicle and drove away. The detective paused the frame, noted the suitcase, made a notation, moved on to the next clip. "We've got 1,000 hours of footage from that neighborhood," he muttered. 1,000 hours meant 1,000 chances to miss something. It meant reviewing the same stretch of sidewalk from 6 different angles. It meant watching people who had nothing to do with the case walk through frame after frame. It meant patience. It's here somewhere. It has to be. Evidence doesn't hide itself. It waits in plain sight for someone to see what it means. The footage sat in the file alongside delivery drivers, neighbors heading to work, cars passing without stopping. Nothing about it screamed urgent. It was just a man with luggage, doing what people with luggage do. Except the suitcase found in Upper Park had been burned, but not completely destroyed. Green fabric, brown leather trim, large. The connection was there. The pieces were all present. Man, suitcase, vehicle, location, timing. But making the connection required pulling those frames from October, matching them to physical evidence from Upper Park, cross-referencing vehicle registrations at 824 Martin Luther King Way, and asking whose car had been parked there on September 2nd. It would take months before anyone made that match. Months during which the answer sat 3 folders deep in evidence storage, timestamp, stamped and logged, waiting for the right question to finally be asked. The footage wasn't hiding. It was just waiting for someone to understand what they were looking at. While the suitcase footage sat waiting in evidence storage, detectives kept building the case, piece by piece, lead by lead. For 3 days in March, the lead detective thought he finally had enough to bring someone in. A tip had come through, partial match to a description. Timeline that almost aligned. Witness statement that could place a suspect near the scene on the right date. Not ironclad, not perfect, but close enough that the detective started building the interview strategy. Questions to ask, evidence to hold back, pressure points to apply. This could be it, he told Deer. Timeline fits, witness puts him in the area. Deer looked at the board, at the red threads connecting locations and dates, at the gaps still visible. "We move too early on this. We lose him forever," Deer said. One shot. That's all homicide detectives get once they bring someone into an interrogation room. One chance to lay out the evidence and see if the story cracks. If the evidence isn't strong enough, if the suspect walks out instead of confessing, the game changes. They lawyer up. They stop talking. They know what the police know, which means they know what to hide. So the detective verified, cross-checked the witness statement, pulled phone records, reviewed surveillance footage to see if it matched the timeline. Then the phone call came. "It doesn't hold," the detective said, setting the receiver down. The witness was wrong about the date. The silence that followed was just the sound of hope deflating, replaced by the discipline that keeps investigations from collapsing under the weight of wanting an answer too badly. Deer drew a red X through the lead on the evidence board. Moving early on a weak thread doesn't just fail, it warns the suspect to disappear and teaches them what evidence to destroy. The detective had seen it before. Partial evidence that looked like enough, pressure from families, from media, from supervisors. The temptation to move, to do something, and then watching the case collapse because they'd acted on almost instead of certain. Almost doesn't hold up in interrogation. Almost doesn't survive cross-examination. Almost is what defense attorneys exploit. They had almost enough. The suitcase footage was still sitting 3 folders deep, waiting for someone to connect it to the burned evidence from Upper Park. The camera chain was still fragmented pieces of the route, but not the unbroken sequence they needed. The timeline was nearly complete, but nearly wasn't enough. And somewhere out there, the person who wheeled Chloee Moore into those woods had no idea how close the detectives were to asking his name. He was living his life, going to work, walking past the building where it happened, acting like someone who'd gotten away with it, because so far he had. The detective turned back to the evidence board. Months of work pinned to cork. Leads followed and cleared. Surveillance footage logged and waiting. A case that was almost strong enough to move on. Almost. Almost wasn't enough. So the detectives kept building, kept stitching footage together, closing gaps, verifying timestamps. It took 11 months. But the final piece clicked into place on a Tuesday morning in early 2024. The lead detective sat in front of multiple monitors, each screen showing a different angle of the same story. Detective Deer stood behind him, watching as the timeline stretched across the whiteboard locations, timestamps, camera angles, all mapped in sequence. "Play it again from the MLK Way camera," the detective said. The video started. September 1st, evening. Chloee Moore walking north on Martin Luther King Way toward 824. A man waiting under a streetlight. They meet. He takes her bag. They walk together past the camera, heading toward the alley behind the Franklin Rosa apartments. Camera 2, the alley entrance, both of them walking out of frame. Camera 3. 13 minutes later, the same man carrying her back toward the building. Not the bag. Her, limp in his arms. Camera 4, the apartment building entrance. He carries her inside. The door closes. 13 minutes from the sidewalk to carrying her, Deer said, watching the timeline unfold. Then 2 days. Then this. The footage jumped forward. September 2nd, early morning. The same man wheeling a suitcase from the building to his vehicle. Green, with brown leather trim. Large enough to hold more than clothes. Camera 5, gas station. Same man, same car. Purchasing accelerant. Camera 6 through 11, the route from Tacoma to Upper Park. Different angles, different cameras, but the same vehicle moving through the night. Headlights off in some frames, driving carefully, taking the long way. Camera 12, Upper Park entrance. The vehicle arrives, stays for 43 minutes, leaves without the suitcase. Individual pieces of evidence whisper, but a complete timeline screams. Each clip on its own had been unremarkable. Public footage. People moving through the city doing ordinary things. A man helping someone with luggage. A customer at a gas station. A driver taking back roads. None of it suspicious in isolation, but stitched together chronologically, synchronized by timestamp, assembled into an unbroken sequence. It stopped being ambiguous. "We've got him," the detective said quietly. Every minute. Every minute, from the moment Chloee Moore walked toward that streetlight to the moment the suitcase entered Upper Park. No gaps, no alternative explanations. One man in every frame, start to finish. The surveillance cameras had done what witnesses couldn't. They'd recorded the truth, without bias, without memory gaps, without changing their story. They'd captured angles Chloee never saw, moments Anthony thought were private, evidence that couldn't be intimidated or discredited. Deer circled a location on the map with a marker. 824 Martin Luther King Way. That's where it started. "That's where we'll find him," the detective said. There was no longer a version of the story where Anthony Millspaugh wasn't in every frame of it. The camera Chloee had walked past without noticing on September 1st had captured the beginning. 11 other cameras had captured everything after. Now they had his face, his car, his route, his choices documented minute by minute across 2 days. Everything but his name on paper. And they were about to get that too. The complete surveillance timeline gave them his face, his car, his route. The gas station footage gave them proof of intent. The gas station footage from September 2nd showed the purchase at 11:47 p.m., less than 3 hours before the fire. The detective reviewed the transaction log. TJ had gone inside to make the purchase while Anthony waited in the car. Accelerant. Not gasoline for the tank, the kind of liquid designed to burn hot and fast. Transaction processed 11:47 p.m., the detective said. Accelerant purchase confirmed. Deer pulled up the Upper Park surveillance feed. Watch Upper Park camera. He approaches at 1:52 a.m. The footage showed a blue Ford Focus entering the frame near the Tacoma Dome, moving slowly toward the wooded area. The timestamp ticked forward. Then something changed. Headlights off, Deer noted. The car went dark. Still moving, but without headlights. Approaching the woods at 2 in the morning. The camera captured it from above, a vehicle circling the perimeter once, slowly, like someone checking to see if they were alone. Then it left. He leaves, the detective said. The timestamp read 1:54 a.m. 2 minutes inside the area, long enough to see where to park, where to carry the suitcase, where to light the match. Long enough to understand what he was about to do. Then the car drove out of frame for 4 minutes. The Upper Park cameras showed empty woods, no vehicles, no movement. The only moment in the entire timeline that looked like doubt. Hesitation is not the same as stopping. It's just proof you knew what you were about to do. Then comes back at 1:56, the detective said. That's when he stays. The blue Ford Focus reappeared, headlights still off. This time it didn't circle, it drove straight to the wooded area and parked. The driver's door opened. A figure emerged, carrying something large enough to match the suitcase from earlier footage. 4 minutes walking into the woods, out of camera range. Then the figure ran back to the car, moved faster than when he'd walked in, got behind the wheel, started the engine. And behind him, visible even from the camera's distance, flames began to rise. The car pulled away. Headlights came back on once it reached the main road, drove like someone heading home after an errand. He hesitated, Deer said, then did it anyway. Whatever that hesitation was, fear, doubt, the last moment of understanding that this couldn't be undone. It didn't last. He came back, and when the footage showed him running from the woods, flames were already visible behind him. The fire department would arrive 12 minutes later. They'd find the suitcase. They'd find Chloee Moore inside it, burned but not completely destroyed. Now detectives had the timeline. The gas station purchase, the route to Upper Park, the car arriving with headlights off, the hesitation, the return, the fire. They still needed one more piece. The flames rose behind him as he ran back to his car. But fire doesn't destroy everything. Sometimes it preserves what someone tried to erase. The suitcase recovered from Upper Park was distinctive green fabric with brown leather trim, a style that hadn't been manufactured in over a decade. The lead detective laid 2 photographs side by side, left the burned suitcase from Upper Park, fabric charred but pattern visible. Right surveillance footage from 824 Martin Luther King Way showing Anthony wheeling a suitcase 3 days earlier. Green fabric, brown leather trim, the detective said. How many of these are still around? Not many. The manufacturer had gone out of business in the early 2000s. The style was recognizable to anyone who'd traveled in the 80s or 90s heavy, built to last, the kind families passed down. The detective zoomed in on the corner of the burned suitcase. A distinctive scuff mark, triangular, where something had scraped the fabric years ago. He compared it to the surveillance still. Same corner, same scuff pattern on the corner, same handle wear, it's the same suitcase. But matching patterns wasn't enough. They needed provenance. A trail that led from Upper Park back to one person who couldn't claim coincidence. The detective pulled the property records file. Estate settlements. Inheritance documentation tied to Anthony Millspaugh's family. There it was. Records show it was inherited, he said, from his grandmother. He kept it. The suitcase wasn't just distinctive, it was personal. A family object held onto for years after its original owner had died. Not something you could claim was borrowed or stolen. Something that sat in storage with your name attached to its history. Objects carry memory, and when they carry the dead, they carry evidence that doesn't forget. Before we show you how that family heirloom became the evidence that sealed this case, comment A or B with one short reason. A equals object tell the truth, or B equals he thought fire would erase it. Please note, the next part includes some fictionalized details for narrative purposes, but the core message is what matters. The detective placed the photographs in the case file. The suitcase had traveled from Anthony's apartment to his car, from his car to Upper Park, from Upper Park to a fire that was supposed to consume it completely. But fire is imperfect. It leaves enough. Enough to see the green fabric, enough to trace the brown leather trim, enough to match the scuff marks, enough to prove that the object wheeled out of his apartment was the same object firefighters pulled from the flames. The same suitcase that once held his grandmother's belongings now held the one piece of evidence he couldn't explain away. An unbroken chain wrapped around an object too personal to deny. Now they just needed one more confirmation, and they were about to get it from the person who'd helped him wheel it out. The suitcase confirmed it. The surveillance confirmed it. Now they needed confirmation from the person who'd helped wheel it out. TJ didn't look like someone who'd helped dispose of a body. He looked like someone who just realized he had. He sat across from the lead detective in the interview room, hands shaking on the table, recording device glowing red between them. The detective kept his voice steady. This wasn't about crushing TJ, it was about getting the truth that would close the last gap. Tell me about the phone call. the detective said. The night of September 1st. TJ pressed his hands flat against the table. He called and said someone overdosed, TJ said. Asked what to do. I said call 911. But you went over there. Yeah, he asked me to come. I thought maybe I could help. The detective waited. Silence after a partial answer is heavier than a direct question. He asked me to go to the gas station, TJ continued. Buy something. I didn't think about it. What did you buy? Accelerant. The detective noted it. The gas station footage had already confirmed it TJ at 11:47 p.m. purchasing the liquid, walking back to Anthony's car. The question wasn't whether it happened, it was whether TJ understood what he was helping with. Then Upper Park, the detective said. He said he needed help moving something. I was lookout, watched while he went into the woods. Did you know what was in the suitcase? TJ's voice broke. No, I swear. He just said he needed help moving something. I didn't know. Helping family isn't a crime until you learn what you are helping them do. The detective studied him. TJ's story matched the surveillance footage, matched the gas station timestamp, matched the Upper Park cameras showing one figure staying with the car while another walked into the woods. Nothing contradicted the evidence. Nothing suggested he'd known Chloee Moore was in that suitcase. He was collateral damage, pulled in by family loyalty, asked to help with what he thought was overdose cleanup, not realizing until much later what he'd actually been part of. Did your uncle tell you what happened to her? Not really. Just that someone overdosed, that he panicked, that he needed help. The pen scratched across the notepad. Every answer TJ gave filled another gap. Every admission confirmed what the cameras had shown. TJ hadn't chosen to help dispose of a body. He'd chosen to help his uncle. And those two things turned out to be the same. TJ told them the truth. It was enough to close the last gap in the timeline, and enough to close the door on Anthony's story. The footage showed what happened. The suitcase showed where it went. The accelerant purchase showed the plan. And now TJ's account showed that even the person Anthony had pulled in to help didn't know the full truth. Which meant Anthony did. Now it was time to put him in a room and show him exactly what they had. TJ told them everything. Now it was time to hear what Anthony would say. Anthony Millspaugh walked into the interrogation room on a morning in 2024, thinking he was about to answer questions about an incident from the previous September. The room was stark white. A metal table bolted to the floor, 2 hard plastic chairs, a two-way mirror. The door closed with a metallic click. The lead detective and Detective Deere were already seated. Folder of evidence on the table. Anthony sat down. The detective pressed record. We want to talk about an incident that happened last September, the lead detective said, keeping his tone casual. Do you have any idea why you're here? Anthony looked between them. His face showed confusion, or what confusion was supposed to look like. To be honest, I don't, Anthony said. I mean, I know a lot goes on, but I don't. The detective nodded. Let the silence sit. It's a standard opener. Ask someone why they're in an interrogation room before telling them what you know. See what they volunteer. Most people who've done nothing wrong say exactly that. I have no idea. Most people who've done something they're trying to hide say it too, but the delivery is different. This case started off as a missing person case, the detective said. Young girl. Her name was Chloe. Do you remember her? The name hung in the air. Anthony's hands shifted. Chloe, he repeated. I I don't know. I mean, I might have heard the name. The first lie in an interrogation room isn't what you say when asked. It's claiming you don't know why you're being asked. The detective watched his face, watched where his eyes went. In interrogations like this, the detective already knows the answer to every question. The questions aren't about gathering information. They're about measuring the distance between truth and whatever story the suspect has prepared. She went missing September 1st, the detective continued. 18 years old, worked at Safeway, was excited about moving into her own place. Her mother filed a missing person report the next day. Anthony nodded slightly, the kind of nod that says you're listening but doesn't commit. We recovered her body from Upper Park, the detective said, burned in a suitcase. Anthony's hands pressed against the armrests. Behind the detective, a year of work sat waiting. Surveillance footage showing Anthony at every stage. Phone records, TJ's statement. The suitcase traced to his grandmother. The gas station purchase. The Upper Park cameras. The timeline assembled frame by frame. The detective leaned back. Does any of that sound familiar? I heard about it, Anthony said, but I don't know why I'm here. He said he didn't know why he was there. Behind the detective, a year of footage said otherwise. In the folder on the table sat snapshots that would walk him through every minute from the moment Chloe met him to the moment the suitcase entered Upper Park. And the detective was about to lay them out, one by one, until there were no stories left to tell. Anthony said he didn't know why he was there. The detective opened the folder. The first snapshot showed Chloee Moore walking north on Martin Luther King Way on September 1st, bag in hand. Nothing about her stride saying anything was wrong. This is where it started, the detective said, sliding the photo across the table. Do you recognize this location? Anthony looked at it. I mean, yeah, that's MLK Way. The detective laid out another snapshot. Same camera angle. A man waiting under a street light. Chloe approaching. That's you, the detective said. Anthony shifted in his seat. I might have been around there. Another snapshot. The two of them walking together, him carrying her bag. You met her. You carried her bag. 13 minutes later, the next snapshot showed Anthony carrying Chloe back toward the building. Not the bag, her. This is a snapshot of you walking across the street, and that's Chloee Moore in your arms. The explanations started. She'd asked for help. She'd been sick. He thought she just needed to lie down. He was trying to help her. The detective let him talk, then laid out the next snapshot. September 2nd. Morning. Anthony wheeling a suitcase from his building toward his car. Your grandmother's suitcase, the detective said, the one recovered at Upper Park. Anthony's explanations got shorter. Yes, he'd moved some things. Yes, he'd needed to transport something. The detective kept laying out photos. Gas station, 11:47 p.m. TJ walking out with a purchase. Accelerant, the detective said. Upper Park. Car approaching with headlights off. Circling. Leaving. Returning. The whole outcome to this thing makes you look horrible. Okay? You didn't call 911. You didn't do anything. Each denial closed off a little faster than the last, not because he broke, but because there was nowhere left in the timeline for him to stand. The detective spread the final sequence across the table. The car at Upper Park. The figure walking into the woods. The same figure running back. Flames visible behind him. This is you, the detective said. Every frame, start to finish. Anthony stared at the photos. The hour he'd spent explaining around them, claiming confusion, offering alternative stories, suggesting he might have helped but didn't know what was happening, collapsed under the weight of images that didn't need interpretation. Surveillance doesn't forget. It doesn't misremember. It doesn't change its story under pressure. It just records what happened and waits for someone to ask what it saw. The detective leaned forward. "Tell me what you did." Anthony's voice came out flat, exhausted. The voice of someone who'd run out of places to hide. "Yeah, I put her in a suitcase. Yeah, I wheeled her out. Yeah, I put her in my car." The words hung in the air. After an hour of deflection, half-truths, and attempts to explain away what the cameras had captured, it took one sentence to stop. The full admission that closed every question the surveillance had opened. For the first time since the interrogation began, Anthony Millspaugh had nothing left to say. But the detective wasn't finished yet. Anthony had said it. "Yeah, I put her in a suitcase." The words sat in the interrogation room like physical objects neither of them could move. The detective let the confession sit in the room for a full 10 seconds before speaking again. 10 seconds is longer than most people realize. It's enough time to understand that what was just said can't be unsaid. Enough time for the person who spoke to hear their own words echo back and realize what they've admitted. The detective leaned forward. "You didn't call 911, he said. "You didn't do anything. You carried her in your apartment." Anthony's shoulders dropped. For the past hour, he'd tried deflecting. Maybe TJ knew more. Maybe the boyfriend was involved. Maybe someone else could explain the gaps. But the surveillance footage didn't show gaps. It showed choices. Every minute from the moment Chloe met him to the moment the suitcase entered Upper Park was documented. "I should have just called," Anthony said. 3 words. Not, "I panicked." Not, "I didn't know what to do." Just the admission that the right choice had been available, and he'd chosen something else instead. The detective watched him decide that there was no version of this left to control. There's a moment in interrogations where the suspect stops trying to manage the narrative. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the absence of the next excuse. The recognition that every explanation they've offered has been answered by evidence they didn't know existed. Anthony had tried. He'd claimed confusion, offered alternative timelines, suggested that others might have been involved. But the surveillance footage showed one man in every frame. The suitcase was inherited from his grandmother. The gas station purchase was made by TJ at his request. Upper Park showed him arriving alone, leaving alone, returning alone. The detective closed the folder. "Today, you're going to be arrested for controlled substance homicide," he said. Not a threat, not a negotiation, just the procedural conclusion to a year of investigation and an hour of confession. Anthony didn't argue, didn't ask what that meant or whether there was another option. He just sat in the chair while the detective stood up. The interview was over. The recording device stopped. The door opened. Anthony was arrested that day. Whatever came next, whatever story he might want to tell in court, whatever explanation his attorney might build, whatever version of events he'd tried to present to a jury, wasn't his to decide anymore. The room he'd been trying to talk his way out of for an hour became the last place he'd speak freely before a courtroom decided the rest. The surveillance footage would be entered as evidence. The suitcase would be traced through inheritance records. TJ's statement would be filed. The timeline would be presented frame by frame. And at the center of it all would be the admission he'd made after the detective laid out the photos one by one. Yeah, I put her in a suitcase. Yeah, I wheeled her out. Words spoken in an interrogation room. Recorded. Transcribed. Undeniable. But that courtroom was still months away. The courtroom was still months away. It arrived in August 2024. The Pierce County Prosecutor's Office filed charges 3 days after the interrogation, homicide by controlled substance, the death of Chloee Moore. Anthony Millspaugh was formally arrested. The confession he'd given in that interrogation room, "Yeah, I put her in a suitcase. Yeah, I wheeled her out," became part of the case file. The surveillance footage was catalogued. The suitcase inheritance records were documented. TJ's statement was filed. A year of investigation distilled into charging documents that would determine what happened next. In August, Anthony stood in Pierce County Courthouse for arraignment. The room was all wood paneling and formal procedure. He wore custody clothing. His attorney stood beside him. The arraignment judge presided from the bench, reading the charges aloud. "How do you plead to the charge of homicide by controlled substance?" the judge asked. Anthony's attorney spoke for him. "Not guilty, Your Honor." 2 words. Not the hour-long confession that had unspooled in the interrogation room. Not the admission that came after the detective laid out snapshot after snapshot. Just the procedural response that every defendant has the right to enter regardless of what they said before the courtroom. "Trial date to be set pending discovery," the judge said. Defendant remanded to custody. The gavel struck. The arraignment was over. The legal machinery moved forward. An interrogation room forces you to account for what you did. A courtroom lets you say you didn't. The confession Anthony had given would be challenged. His attorney would argue it was coerced or misunderstood or taken out of context. The surveillance footage would be examined frame by frame. The suitcase would be authenticated through chain of custody documentation. TJ's involvement would be scrutinized. Every piece of evidence the detective had assembled would be presented, contested, defended. That's how the legal system works. An admission in an interrogation room doesn't end a case, it begins the next phase of it. The prosecution builds its argument. The defense builds its counter. A jury eventually decides which version of events to believe. The case that took a year to build would take longer still to resolve. Anthony would not admit guilt in court the way he had. Piece by piece in that interrogation room. The legal process and the truth-telling were now 2 separate tracks. He'd told the detective what happened. He'd admitted putting Chloee in the suitcase, wheeling her out, driving to Upper Park. He'd said, "I should have just called," when confronted with the choice he didn't make. But in court, through his attorney, he said, "Not guilty." The confession that had taken an hour to extract would be contested, challenged, relitigated. The legal process, unlike the investigation, was not yet finished. Months would pass, motions would be filed, discovery would be exchanged, a trial date would eventually be set. And somewhere in all that procedural distance, the question would remain: would a jury believe what Anthony had admitted in that room? Or would they decide the evidence wasn't enough? But for one person, the waiting was already over. Mother stands before courthouse microphones, September 2024, 1 year after Chloee disappeared, days after Anthony Millspaugh's arrest. She's not here to celebrate. Hands grip prepared statement, paper trembling slightly under September sun. Behind her, Pierce County Courthouse doors close on another procedural day. Before her, reporters wait with microphones extended like offerings, cameras recording every breath. Her voice barely steady. Our thoughts are with Chloe's friends, family, and loved ones. The statement is brief, a few sentences acknowledging arrest, thanking investigators who spent 11 months assembling surveillance timeline, asking for privacy as family processes what comes next. She doesn't mention Anthony by name. Doesn't need to. Everyone present knows who wheeled green suitcase with brown leather trim to Upper Park, who chose silence over calling 911, who let 2 days pass while Chloe lay dead. But speaking his name would give him space in this moment. And this moment belongs to Chloe, 18 years old, dental hygienist dreams. Daughter who texted emojis and counted Safeway hours and never came home from Franklin Rosa Apartments on September 1st. Statement ends after 90 seconds. Reporters disperse, lowering cameras, retracting microphones. Press conference follows its schedule, 15 minutes, maybe 20, including questions. She politely declines. But grief doesn't follow schedules. Grief doesn't pack equipment after 20 minutes and return to newsrooms. Grief stays in trembling hands long after recording lights blink off. Mother folds statement, steps back from podium. Detective Deere stands nearby one of the investigators who matched suitcase to Anthony's grandmother, who assembled complete surveillance chain from MLK Way to Upper Park. He offers quiet nod. Case isn't over. Trial looms ahead, months, likely years of continuances, motions, legal manoeuvring. Anthony pleaded not guilty despite interrogation, confession. His attorney will challenge evidence, contest timeline, argue reasonable doubt. Court system grinds slowly, measuring justice in procedural increments. Here's what reporters didn't know that September day Chloe's mother would never see trial's end. Between arrest and resolution. Between charges filed and verdict rendered, she passed away. Case that took a year to build would take longer to resolve through court system. She spoke those public words. Our thoughts are with Chloe's friends, family, and loved ones. But never heard final judgment. Never sat through victim impact statements. Never watched jury foremen stand with verdict form in hand. Murder cases follow their timelines, discovery deadlines, motion hearings, trial dates stretching across calendars. Mothers don't always follow same schedule. Evidence waits patiently in evidence rooms. Grief doesn't wait for courtroom calendars to align. Anthony sits in Pierce County Jail awaiting trial. Chloe remains gone, reduced to evidence photos and surveillance timestamps. Mother who carried her, raised her, texted desperately September 2nd morning, "Baby, where are you?" Passed away before legal system finished processing her daughter's death. Case will conclude, eventually. Verdict will be rendered. But some resolutions arrive too late for those who needed them most. Final chapter approaches not with triumph, but with accounting of what remains when legal proceedings close and cameras stop recording and courtrooms empty for last time. What's left when the victim is gone? Her mother is gone, and the man who killed her sits in a cell awaiting sentencing. Inventory the absence, Chloee Moore. 18. Dead. September 2023, in Franklin Rosa Apartments bathroom. Her mother gave one courthouse statement to reporters, then passed away before trial ended, before verdict, before sentencing, before any conclusion that might have shaped grief. Anthony Millspaugh. 39 sits in Pierce County Jail, awaiting sentence for controlled substance homicide. Justice machinery grinds forward. For whom? Chloe was working towards something. Dental hygienist training. Each Safeway shift counting as hours towards certification. She texted her mother emojis. Moved through September 1st like any Friday until she met Anthony at 824 MLK Way and carried her bag upstairs. Life interrupted mid-step. Not a case file with timestamps and evidence logs, a person. Young woman whose mother texted, "Baby, where are you?" September 2nd morning, and never received reply. Daughter who never came home. Anthony's choice fractured his family too. TJ, his nephew, bought accelerant at gas station, acted as lookout at Upper Park, then told investigators everything. He helped build surveillance timeline. Match green suitcase with brown leather trim to Anthony's grandmother. Close evidence gaps. Chloe's mother spoke once to cameras, brief words thanking investigators, then died before seeing conclusion. One choice, September 2023. Every consequence radiating outward since. Anthony could have called 911 when Chloe overdosed in the alley behind Franklin Rosa Apartments. Instead, he carried her inside. Could have called when he found her dead in shower, water running for hours. Instead, he called TJ. Wheeled suitcase to Upper Park in early morning darkness, September 3rd. Could have left the suitcase, walked away. Instead, he bought accelerant. Gas station receipt timestamped 11:47 p.m. and set it on fire. Here's the irony. Fire gives Anthony set that suitcase ablaze to destroy evidence. Burn the body, burn the fabric, burn every trace connecting Chloee Moore to Anthony Millspaugh. But fire at Upper Park brought fire department. Fire department found charred suitcase with human remains. Called police. Triggered forensics. Police identified Chloe through dental records, those same teeth she was training to care for in others.
Chloe, if you're getting my calls and messages, baby girl, please just let me know you're all right. I can hardly breathe. My mind is all over the place. I'm really, really scared.
His attempt to erase her triggered 11-month investigation, ending in arrest, confession, charges. Sentencing pending. Case that took year to build will conclude in minutes when judge speaks final term. Courtroom records decision. Files close. Anthony serves whatever sentence gets handed down, but Chloe stays gone. Her mother stays gone. Resolution isn't restoration. Some absences stay absent permanently. What remains after surveillance plays in courtroom? Confession enters record. Verdict reads, is weight. Weight that doesn't lift when gavel falls. Chloe counted Safeway hours toward future she'd never reach. Her mother waited for justice she'd never see concluded. And what the legal system calls resolution is just paperwork, measuring what can't be measured, the shape of a life. Interrupted. Chloee Moore's life was cut short at 18 years old. Her mother never saw justice concluded. This case leaves behind questions that don't resolve when the gavel falls. A young woman with dreams and plans, reduced to evidence photos and surveillance timestamps. A mother who spoke once to cameras, then passed away before the trial ended.
You didn't do anything to help her out. You didn't call 911. You didn't do anything. The whole outcome to this thing makes you look horrible, okay?
These are the weights true crime cases carry, not just the verdict, but the permanent absences that no sentence can restore. What this story reveals is the gap between legal resolution and human restoration. Anthony Millspaugh will face his sentence. Chloee Moore stays gone.
Yeah, I put her in a suitcase. Yeah, I wheeled her out. Yeah, I put her in my car, in my blue Ford Focus.
That's the reality behind every true crime case. The courtroom closes, the files get archived. But the grief doesn't follow that schedule. If this story made you think, please take a moment to leave a comment below. What stays with you? I read every response. If you appreciate careful, respectful coverage of real cases, please subscribe and share this story. These stories matter because the people in them mattered. Thank you for listening with respect and attention. This story is based on a real case. Some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling, but the core facts remain true to what happened. My deepest respect goes to Chloee Moore's family and loved ones. May her memory be honored.
Our thoughts are with Chloe's friends, family, and loved ones.